Thank you, Gillian, and very good to have here almost a full house of GSSB members. Welcome to you all. Our first task for the morning is to approve the draft summary of our September meeting. Can I ask whether people are happy to approve that draft?
This is Rebecca Correa speaking. I only have I have no issues with the draft, but I have a question on a follow-up. Is this the right time for that question?
Sure.
So there is a delay on the mapping being prepared with the CDP colleagues. So the question was, do we have an update on that delay?
Actually, so it was shortly delayed, but it is Harold Powell's from the GRI staff. So it is published. We had a webinar on it, so that's all in place. And the delay was due to that we both were looking for the right moment to publish it.
Thank you for that. So any comments, any other comments? Okay, then I take it we can approve that draft summary and make it a final summary. Thank you all. The next item is to review the action points, item 2 on the agenda. I do have a question myself. We are working on a paper, the second row of the paper, that outlines options for policy adoption of the GRI standards, which we discussed in May 2025. I just wondered whether there were amendments to that paper as a result of that discussion, and then we need to understand where that paper is at with the policy team.
So we've taken the feedback back to the policy team, and we're looking at preparing a new draft of this, but given capacity of the policy team, that's not something that has advanced beyond us taking on the feedback from the GSB during the meeting. But we will pick up pace with that. We'll have a later discussion during the meeting on the policy related developments at GI. So we can come back to that. But right now, the standards division is not doing any work on this. This is something we will be picking up with the broader work that the policy team will be leading on adoption.
Could I ask that we have an updated version of that paper put to us just for noting at a future meeting nearby? You said you've updated that paper.
No. What I said is we took this feedback back. We can change, provide the changes to the paper, but it's not going to be the next version of what the proposal for changes. That is not something that this paper will represent. But we can definitely bring back an updated version.
Dates based on our input, it would be helpful to see that paper again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is Rebecca speaking. On the second item, regulator-focused narrative and communication tools, I have a question which is still to be determined. The question is, why is the status still to be determined? And I think that once it's ready, we should do our best to include the marketing team colleagues, but even from the outset, from the beginning, because I think it's important to give it as much, that's like publicity as possible.
In terms of the narrative and to be determined, this is with the policy team, not as we have shared earlier, that team had a significant change in capacity with no leadership for most of the year. And there are changes to the composition of the team and also to the approach, and they're picking these things up. But that is not regulatory focused narrative is a deliverable that they will bring eventually back to GI as a whole and also the GSB. But there is no update on the schedule yet, and that is due to the changes.
Okay. And is it possible to add a comment on marketing and once the paper?
I mean, any follow-up to the earlier discussions will first be presented for discussion, as always.
Yeah, as always.
To the GSB. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll take that action list. Everybody's happy with that action list as being complete, and just some follow-up actions there. So if we go on to an update on policy submissions, this is something that we have requested, not just on the submissions, but just an update on the policy work. I think we all have an interest in knowing what's been done in terms of promoting the standards to policymakers. Who is speaking to this? Bastian?
Yeah, I think this is just closing, I think, in part the loop on the ESRS consultation process. We have discussed with the GSSB that GI is putting forward a submission as part of the formal public consultation that has been done. And since then, there was a meeting with the chair of GSSB and EFRA colleagues where we were joined by Carol, Anna for the meeting. We've built on the staff level then as part of the drafting that was going into final version of the simplified ESRS. We've continued to provide input over the last weeks, and as most of you will know that have proximity to that process, they're in the final stages of the ESRS consultation. Right? And that is the boards and the technical group within EFRAG, they are looking at final draft at the moment, and they're in the final negotiations. And on the, now I have to get the date right, 4th of December, there will be a public event in Brussels where the simplified version of the ESRS that is going to be submitted to the, or at that point it will be submitted to the European Commission, will be presented. But on public record right now, I think it's too early to speculate about all the changes that will have repercussions for GI, positive and negative. But I think what we can say is that we saw a very positive attitude towards our feedback and taking on some of the very specific things that GIs put forward in terms of consideration. So positive development there.
Thank you.
On the UK submission, there we've made the submission, but there is not yet follow-up in terms of stakeholder engagement on specific submissions. So that might come up still, where we do follow-up. But I think that is, of course, of a different nature. The consultation is very focused on the IFRS S1 and S2 adoption in the UK.
Galia?
Galia is speaking. EFRAG received 20,000 comments from 700 respondents. Do you think our comments will be taken into account with this huge universe of people that have submitted something?
Yeah. So what I can say is that the EFRAG leadership has taken us up on the request to have a meeting early on, right after the submission. And since then, we had the chance to explain more of our feedback. Of course, we had to induce priority. We've provided significant feedback. But just from staff level, we're quite happy with the traction we've got. This is happening in, right? So we've definitely been able to build on the earlier collaboration. And there was interest to continue to reference the GI standard. Interest to look closer at some of the key points that we're making in relation to impact materiality and so on. So all in all, very positive. But I would definitely acknowledge that this is happening in a wider context of a significant number of comments, significant political discussion, and all of that. Yeah.
And that was a joint board and technical staff meeting with EFRAG, and I confirm the response that Bastian has set out there. Okay, thank you. So that then moves us on to an update from each member. So this all our members here are volunteer members, all doing other things and have valuable contributions to make in terms of what's happening within their regions, within their stakeholder constituency, because we are a multi-stakeholder board and each member is in touch with what's happening more broadly in their stakeholder constituency, but also with respect to their own work. So we'll go around the room now and hear from members anything they wish to say about updates that are relevant to our deliberations over the next couple of days. Starting with our Vice Chair.
Thanks, Carol. Jeff Robertson here. From the Canadian side, I mean, one of the big updates on the sustainability file, certainly this week, is the new federal budget. It was just approved in the last couple of days. It was a bit of a mixed bag from a sustainability perspective. There were positive items like increased stringency on methane release emissions for oil and gas, as well as a focus on strengthening the industrial carbon pricing scheme. This comes in the wake of canceling the consumer carbon price in March of this year. But also in the budget, there were some things that on a sustainability file were seen as a bit of a step backwards. This included some changes and increases in fossil fuel production subsidies for specifically for LNG, liquefied natural gas facilities, which is certainly a shame. But also some extension of tax credits for things like carbon capture and storage. So as I mentioned, a bit of a mixed bag, but there was commentary of continued commitment from the Liberal government on climate and sustainability. So hopefully we see that come to fruition. On the reporting side, specifically, Canada continues to be one of the global leaders in corporate reporting. I think around 95% of our large companies do undertake corporate sustainability reporting either with GRI or with SASB. The Canadian Sustainability Standards Board did have their S1, their versions of S1 and S2 approved, I believe, in December of last year. But the Securities Administrator has put a pause on the development of our climate disclosure rule. So things are in a little bit of a holding pattern from a mandatory and ISSB reporting perspective. And we'll see how that situation develops, as I'm sure it'll be news to no one on this panel that pauses are happening many places other than Canada. But I'll leave it there.
Morning, everyone. This is Igazuma. I represent the Africa jurisdiction, and just to share that there's growing interest, especially in carbon markets in the region, and there's also sort of been like a surge in the development of taxonomies in countries like Kenya, Ghana, Morocco, and Nigeria. And this means that there are implications for impact reporting, especially businesses that have, began their sustainability reporting journey with the GRI to think about integrating the GRI standards taxonomy. Of course, this is going to be a very important shift for companies that are just about to start sustainability reporting in the region. But it's important to see that the development of taxonomies is increasing. Guidelines and the recommendations of the GRI taxonomies is very helpful for new adopters or new sustainability report preparers.
Anne Lindsay from the Global Labour constituency. I suppose I just wanted to flag up, and again, I don't think it'll come as a surprise to people around the table, but just how intensive the kind of policy consultations, discussions, responses have been over the summer, which wasn't that quiet, and also into autumn. So I think we heard from the number of responses, it's really clear how much interest there is in issues around sustainability reporting standards globally right now. And personally, I wanted to flag up that I was very happy to be able to take part in the panel that GRI organised on the 22nd of October around GRI 102, Business Action on Climate Change, as a GSSB member, and the level of interest in how that standard could be used to support companies and organisations in their objectives around just transition.
Charles Cho, I'm a civil society representative based in Canada and one of the two academics of the board. So I'll just briefly complete. Jeff just gave a very nice overview of Canada, but I think also Bill C-59, which is the newly anti-greenwashing law, which is kind of taking a step back, which is another kind of a downer of what's going on in Canadian. I'll speak more on a maybe personal basis on my role and what I've been up to. As an academic, I have the privilege and honor to be solicited, especially since I was on the board, to share insights in various events around the world. I've been giving talks about sustainable reporting and, of course, including GR reporting in countries like Indonesia, Tunisia, Korea, and New Zealand lately. Happy to report that the space seems to be still quite moving, especially in those countries I've been observing a high interest in hearing the whole landscape of reporting between all the actors, such as CSRD in Europe and GRI and ISSB. I would say that there is still a strong interest in having GRI standards, a lot of interest. Also, as my role as a professor, students asking about GRI, asking how to get certified, what are the differences. So as the generations is very open to that, I also obviously bring it in my own classes and being exposed to students. So I have a little bit specific role in that. But overall, yeah, it's been a busy few months with those uptakes, I think, around the globe. Those countries are not specifically targeted to go, but I was just happened to be there. But I think the experience I've heard is, cautiously optimistic, I would say. Thank you.
Hi, I am Deborah Ng. I am also from Canada. I think we're very highly represented here. But I do work for a US firm, so maybe I'm speaking for the US as well. I mean, the bad news, of course, is really nothing is happening in the US, certainly not at the federal level. I think things really need to be pulled down to the state level. And California just is rolling out its regulated climate disclosures, which is good to see. And they actually did include Scope 1, Scope 2, and material Scope 3 emissions, which is something that the SEC and Canada have pulled back on in terms of getting disclosures. I can say anecdotally from what I'm seeing from corporates and what I'm hearing from investors is that the reporting landscape, or what we're seeing in reporting, hasn't changed materially. Companies that were reporting continue to report on the metrics that they were reporting before, and the companies that weren't still aren't, and probably won't in this environment. But that doesn't mean that there's a lack of interest from investors, right? So investors are still working to push companies. I think everyone is really more in a state of, I guess the term is green hushing. And maybe a little bit of what's happening in Canada as well, to the same extent, where things are happening, people are just not talking about it, but that's my update.
Mediating institutions. Coming from Sri Lanka, we've seen reporting landscapes not changing really too much from the companies that have been reporting using the GRI standards. I think a quick Google search showed me that it's about 76% that Sri Lanka is, 76% of Sri Lankan companies utilize GRI standards. The companies that do report on it continue to report on it, notwithstanding the mandatory requirements of IFRS. But there are instances where companies, unfortunately, in my opinion, are being pushed towards a compliance type of reporting regime, which takes away that ability for companies to identify their impacts and then come to, in my opinion, the proper way to identify their risks and opportunities. Having said that, that also only applies to the top 100 public quoted companies in Sri Lanka, and but I know that the GRI South Asia is working with the Export Development Board and the Sustainable Development Council in Sri Lanka to promote the GRI standards through extensive, detailed, in-depth trainings for those companies to adopt the GRI standards. Just speaking to Dr. Aditi Halda, she also says that she's at the moment in touch with the regulatory authorities in India and Bangladesh as well.
Hello, it's Gala, Business Constituency Europe. Updates from Europe. We have many representatives here. They can. The last week, the European Commission published so-called Quick Fix Delegation Act. It is revising the first set of ESRS standards for the companies that have already reported, major listed companies, and overall, it simplify and allow these companies not to report more information, specifically in the financial spectrum and for financial risks. This postponing of financial reporting could be even for the next 2 years. It's not only for 2025 reporting cycle. Another update is that the XBRL system or digital tagging also is not required for the companies for the 2025 reporting year. And here I wanted to acknowledge our standard team that they continue with the XBRL. So you will be the first one actually with the tagging system in the world. So well done. Really congrats for the people working in this. And another update is for the EU Climate Act, that the European Parliament adopted the position for the proposed amendment to the climate law, setting a binding 2040 emission reduction target for the Europe, which is 90% reduction versus 1990. So by 2040 versus 1990. And it allows 5% of the credits to be used for reaching this target by 2040.
Hi, this is Tomo Machiba from Zero Board Research Institute, Japan. I represent a mediating institution. And in Japan, there is no particular regulatory update apart from SSBJ integrating the latest revised SASB standard. And well, it's like Japanese firms and they're really monitoring the omnibus, progress, as well as the very high interest in the GHG protocol revision process, and particularly the current public consultation on Scope 2, which significantly impact renewable energy procurement, and especially across the different regions within Japan. And myself, I kind of, making, promote GRI standards and organizing GRI GSSB seminar last 6 months. And I organized 5 webinars together with, help with from the Secretariat, which I really appreciate. And including the financial sector, standards and climate change, and the energy and apparel sector, and DI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and lastly, data and the monetary frauds. And participation is between 50 to the 200, and depending on the subject, especially climate change, it's quite high interest. And I'm aiming to, making the more attractive by engaging the working group members or reporting companies, or just presenting the GRI standards draft. And so far we are getting yeah, good audience and good interest from the participants. Thank you.
Okay, Susanna here from the Global Labour constituency. I will mention 3 processes that currently global trade unions are working with as regards global regulatory frameworks for corporate sustainability. One is obviously the revision of the EU omnibus package. European trade unions are currently developing campaigns with their governments to try to keep the EU corporate sustainability regulation as progressive as possible. The package is now entered into the negotiations between and with the EU member states governments. The second process is the UN Business and Human Rights Treaty. The global unions attended the last 11th negotiation session at the end of the October. And here again, the work is focused on turning business human rights due diligence into the binding obligations as a matter of law. The third one is working on a follow-up to another important international legal development, and that is the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on climate change obligations, where the court stated that climate change action adaptation mitigations has to be human rights compliant. So we now, as global trade unions, we are working on a follow-up, what that could mean in terms of climate change action, business and labor rights. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is Yan Dong from China, from a research institution. So there's quite a lot of it happening in China, as usual, every year. So from the ESG reporting side, on the mandatory side, the stock exchange, also the companies who is listed on the Chinese stock exchange market, they need to start reporting from 2026. But the requirements are very general and very brief. So I would expect some companies, big companies, start doing something on ESG reporting as a first round. But the state-owned companies, they are already asked to report from 2022. But I can also say their reporting get more and more mature and complicated in the coming years. So I think this is the good sign that more companies in China start reporting. And on the voluntary side, the finance ministry has released the ESG disclosure requirements. I think it was back in last year already. So with also ISSB S1 and S2. But the difference is that it asked for double materiality. So in addition to complying with the financial materiality, they also ask for impact assessment as well, but without too much detailed methodology, I would say. And there is a very intensive, comprehensive, and urgent programs for developing. I'm not sure if it's adopting or developing more topic standards as well very soon. So we were actually discussing what will happen, because ISSB will probably go with those sector standards very slowly. So China probably wants to go ahead of that one. So we don't know yet what will happen there, but it's on the progress. So that is from the reporting side. And from the general trend side, I can say that China is really trying to catch up with the sustainable development. It does not call sustainable development in the wording or ESG in the wording itself. They call it green high quality development. And within this framework, a lot of focus has been put on decarbonization. So it's all about reaching carbon peak by 2030 and reaching carbon neutral by 2060, which was reinforced by our chair. I think it was a month ago or so. And so within that aim, or within that kind of a topic, there's a lot of state investment, state money goes to decarbonization. So, but there are 3 levels of regulation or kind of operation procedures coming. So the first layer is on something called the industrial parks. So it's kind of a big region, or it's a region where it could be one company or several manufacturing company, which is located all together on within this industrial park as an industrial or only zone. So within those zones, they're trying to do a lot of investment into renewable energies, just to make sure that it's possible for the companies located in the industrial parks to reach carbon neutral at a certain point. And the second layer is on the companies. So the companies are now really asked which is some of the companies, if you are within certain sectors and if you are big enough, you need to report on your emissions, and they are really trying to broaden the scope of how many companies needs to report. It used to be only one sector, electricity sectors, which needs to report on their carbon emission last, I think, 2 years ago. And the last year, there are 3 more sectors added: cement, aluminum, and the other one I can't remember. So 3 more, and now it's going to expand to cover 95% of China's carbon emission. So all of those companies need to report. And then on the product side, there's a lot of going on to define the rules of calculating product carbon footprint. And we don't know what will happen next. Then there might be something with carbon labeling, or it's product carbon labeling will coming out, but how, when, and how they can be used in the future, we don't know yet. But this is also super fast progress in making those rules. So a lot of it happening.
Hello, Felipe Martinez from the business constituency in Europe. I don't have much to add because I wanted to mention the European standards, the ESRS, and also the omnibus package, but Gali and Susanna have already commented on this. So I would like to add something on a personal note, some informal discussions that I have had with some colleagues in the mining industry, mining and metals industry, and also with some former colleagues from our industry that now they work for the textiles industry, because we have the draft standard for textiles. So I have been discussing a bit with them what they think about this standard. And they mentioned that it is challenging for the industry to disclose everything which is required now, but at the same time, they showed appreciation for this new standard. And well, they thanked me, but I would like to extend the gratitude to DRI for this, because they think that this standard is really useful for sustainability, for informing the wider society about, and well, the holders which who might be interested in this industry. And the same comments for the climate standard from my industry and the textiles industry, where I had these contacts.
Anna Nefedova, representing a mix of a mediating institution and a business. And the business that I happen to represent is a global one with presence in over 100 countries. So everything that has been discussed applies to my daily life. And I think most will agree that this year has been really showcasing divergent views on sustainability implementation, reporting across different continents, countries, sometimes even within countries. We see different push toward focus areas at a federal level versus state and so on. So it's quite tricky to be able to make progress while respecting where each country is heading individually. I also observe rapid developments of new regulatory and voluntary frameworks around the world, to the extent that it's quite difficult to keep up with the speed and a volume of all of the developments, which I think makes it quite important to emphasize the need to have interconnectedness of the systems that we're all developing. It's the GHG protocol, SBTi, ISO, and plus the regulators that are producing a lot of very important content. How it's going to be harmonized and applied by companies, I think, remains to be seen, and takes quite some effort for all of us to provide input to these institutions to make sure our voices are heard. And then a couple unrelated to regulatory developments points is that I think the role of technology in supporting sustainability reporting continues to grow. I see the increased attention and recognition that sustainability reporting needs to be treated just like financial reporting is being treated, with proper investments in technologies, automations, and systems to make sure we're getting data when we need it and it's accurate. And then outside of the investment in technology and leveraging that, it's just bringing the rigor to sustainability reporting, so that, you know, the outcomes can be used for decision making. So it's things like internal controls around non-financial reporting, assurance, and producing reporting that can be relied on, that's accurate, has been a big focus for
This is Rebecca Coriat, representing the investment constituency from Europe. A couple of things to add to what has been said. It has been a very difficult year for the investor stakeholder. In the UK, there was an updated stewardship code published in the summer, laying out rights and responsibilities of investors. It applies from January 26, and it has been criticized because it has diluted the ESG aspect of stewardship. So it still talks about the creation of long-term value for clients and beneficiaries leading to sustainable benefits. Whereas before it said for the economy, the environment, and society. So it is a shorter definition, but I think, and we tend to think, that it will allow investors to be more tailored and customized into the priorities they seek to achieve through their investments. We're also watching with some concern some of the EU walking back on the topic of deforestation, and the way it may treat some low-risk countries where tracing certification will not be necessary, so that might create unintended consequences. It wasn't unexpected, but it's still not the direction of travel that we would like to see. And then on a more positive note, in the conversations we have with the investee companies, we really do see that they're still capturing all of the data and information that has sort of been put on hold during 2025. And they're very happy to be asked about that because they hold it and they intend to keep documenting it, even if they may not put this in a prominent way in their reports. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will just finish up with some things that I've been doing. So in the last few weeks, I've been fortunate to be able to speak to our global reporting systems paper at a couple of events. One of them was a conference in South Africa. I was discussing the paper. Sue Lloyd also talked about the ISSB developments, and an email from the conference organizer afterwards was that one of the regulators was in the audience, and the presentation about our global reporting systems paper really brought home to him that the two sets of standards, the GRI standards and the IFRS S standards, are complementary, and that was a really important moment in the conference. The other one was to an academic audience where it was a conference in Italy. Of course, I was online. Richard Barker also spoke. Again, I was speaking about the Global Reporting Systems paper, and I got some emails from people who were actually at the conference in person afterwards, saying that it went down really well, that conceptually it made a lot of sense to the people in the audience. I've also been involved in some focus group discussions, some small group discussions with the UK Department of Business and Trade through my role as chair of the Sustainability Committee at the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. And there was a lot of input around the importance of impact disclosures, including from a member of the Technical Advisory Committee on the standards to be adopted in the UK. It wasn't just coming from me, but quite a bit of input through those focus groups on the importance of the impact disclosures. Bastian and I joined a meeting recently of the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. Their standard, of course, the ISAA 5000 standard on assurance, is really has been designed to be very compatible with GRI reporting, providing assurance over processes, including that process of determining the most They're keen to collaborate further with us, and we'll continue that dialogue with them. Bastian's already spoken about the joint meeting we had with EFRAG on the ESRS. And just in my other work, I've been focusing on finalizing some research on the process of change within organizations as they embed sustainable development thinking. So changes to systems, value, culture, decision making, the benefits that brings, and you know, what does an organization look like when they're thinking only about profit first and foremost, versus one that is embracing sustainable development thinking, and what are the stages of change within organizations along the way of getting there. I've also, since we last met in person and provided these updates, I've published a book with co-researchers with expansive research on the use of digital technologies in sustainability reporting. So looking at what are the benefits to doing that, what are the barriers of doing that. Some of the top barriers, and these are all interconnected really, is lack of funding allocated to do it, a limited understanding of the benefits of adoption of digital technologies, legacy systems, and a lack of skills amongst the workforce to know what to do, what systems to purchase, and so on, and the benefits that it can bring. So those barriers are all interconnected, and things that need to be broken down. So that's my update. I wondered whether anybody had any questions they wanted to ask of other members on their updates, or any further comments, having heard from all of our GSSB members now. Any questions from the staff also we'll consider. Charles?
No, more on the question, if I may, if you allow me to be more specific, remind me when I heard you more giving your updates. Some of the discussions, and I talked about presentations I made, especially in Korea, for example, had some lively discussion about those, you know, how do we deal with like the mandatory coming with ISSB and then GSSB, and you know, there was a lot of word around obviously interoperability versus complementarity, and then global baseline, is it the right thing or not? So there are countries, I think in the audience that I had, which included practitioners and also pretty high level concerns about those languages and those concepts, of wondering about that. So I think it's important to specify that they are, as I mentioned earlier, there is huge interest, but I wanted to give that quick, more specific example of audiences that you just, you know, some people seem to be, I wouldn't say lost, but they're confused. They're confused, and I think it's our job to kind of bring some clarity into it, and I think that was kind of our role. And on my academic side, I was going to mention, not specific to reporting, but there's a case and exercise book I co-published, co-edited, came out actually in April, right after our meeting, that seems to get good reception. But the purpose also for sustainable education, I'm deviating a little bit, but we're trying not to stick and teach sustainable accounting and reporting through standards only. I think it's very important that our cases don't have like, oh, we're gonna apply S1, S2 or GRI standards. No, it's not. It's the broader concept of global reporting in general, how it comes from the regulatory landscape. So that was a good exercise. There are 18 or 17 cases in the book that we asked different authors, ranging from sustainable accounting per se to reporting to other topics. So I just want to bring that up since you reminded me that I forgot some updates, so that's why. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other points or questions? Okay, thank you. So that brings to a close our session on updates, and we can move now into the discussion on our labour standards. Now, we have been putting comments on these exposure drafts on file stage. So GSSB members have been working outside of the meeting in order to give the staff a chance to respond to those comments and for us to consider whether they require changes to the exposure drafts. So I will, with that, hand over to Harold and Natalia to provide us with the staff responses to the comments received to date.
Okay, good morning, GSSB members. My name is Natalia Uribe. I'm Standard Manager at the Labor Project.
Excuse me, Natalia, could you speak
Okay,
up, please?
I will do my best. Yeah, today is a big pleasure for me to have this meeting in person, to see all your faces. We are happy to share the 4 drafts of the last labor-related topic standards. These 4 drafts are presented for discussion and approval for the GSSB members. These standards are very particular because 3 are related with fundamental rights at work and 1 is related with labor rights and value chain and workers in the value chain. Also thanks for the support of our experts from the technical committee and advisory group. We are able to bring these 4 drafts for you. We also want to thank to all of you that provide very valuable comments. We received in total 42 comments at the time we submit the slides for the GSSB meeting. We provide individual feedback in 5 stages, and we hope that we address all the comments. The reminder comments, we will address later. So we provide this reply last week and this week. So what I'm going to do is going through some of the concerns and comments raised by the GSSB members in each draft. Let's see how it is. I propose to give the feedback. I don't know. You want to do it? Okay. Yeah. To share the feedback, then discussion, and then approval. So first and all, I'm going to start with the labor rights in business relationship. For this draft, we received in total 6 comments at the time that we submit the slide to the GSSB. 4 of them were content-related comments, and the other ones were related to editorial ones. And most can be implemented prior to the public consultation, and the others will reply to you in case that we consider them along the PCP feedback. We received comments from the GSSB members on the connection or the linkage between this standard labor rights in business relationship and the current GRI 414 supplier social assessment. What I can say here is that labor rights in business relationship implies the revision of 414 and include revised and new disclosures building on 414. One comment received regarding the disclosure 1141. So the TC decided to keep this disclosure in labor rights in business relationship. The only difference is that in labor rights in business relationship 2A is that it not only covers suppliers, but it covers business relationship. The second comment we received was also the connection or the reference between the sector standards and the labor rights in business relationship, how they are going to refer one to the other one. In particular, the textiles and apparel standard that run through consultation some months ago. In discussion with the sector standard team, we know that one of the feedback from the PCP was to strengthening the consistency and also the transparency regarding the social and labor impacts in business relationship. What are they going to do is they are going to expose this point to their working group, and they are going to build like the proposals considering the draft of labor rights in business relationship. Another point that I can note on this one is that the sector standard, the textile and apparel standard will be presented to a GSSB for approval before. So as a standard team, we think that this way of collaboration, because we're constantly like in alignment or finding a way to align between sectors and topic standard, it will facilitate like future alignment between the standards. No, you have any comments on these 2 points, or I can move on to the next slide.
Chula Andrade Silva here. Natalia, just on the first point of 414, do we need to specifically mention somewhere either in 414 or the new LRBR standard that this is specifically for business relationships and 414 will now only apply to suppliers? Is that differentiation some kind of sentence instruction needed for reporters?
Okay, and thanks, Shulendra, for your comment. What I can do, what I think that the team can do is to be clear regarding like labor rights. Like it's going to 414 will labor rights is going to replace GRI 414, and probably we can highlight better in the explanation of the significant changes between the drafts, the standards, the point that you just raised. Your comments, so I will move on to the next slide. Or do. So the other 2 group of comments received by the GSSB was were related with concerns regarding the granularity and the level of detail requests in the labor rights in business relationship. This is a comment that we have also received in previous labor standards. So if Carol, if you agree, I would also like that maybe Bastian gives like more a systemic like perspective of this concern expressed by the GSSB member, because it has been highlighted before. And then if you want, it can also like share the perspective of the technical committee regarding this point.
Yeah, I think we thought it would be maybe good to build on the earlier discussions that we had on the granularity proposed in the labor-related standards, but this is really extending to any type of standard come. I think from my end, it is a reminder to say that when we develop the standards with the experts, the guiding question is, what is the set of information that illuminates the subject matter at hand and enables stakeholders, internal and external to organizations, to take decisions based on the information? The standards are developed in a way that they actually provide disclosures for a full range of considerations. That does not mean that these standards will always be applied in totality by the individual company. Because the guiding principle above all is still that there is a materiality assessment and determination of the impacts, and the standards are used, the standards disclosures are used selectively to depict the impact at hand. From a communication perspective, it is of course very important that GI keeps emphasizing that this is not a compliance exercise in which the adoption of the GI standards means responding to all standards in all level of detail. It is rather an exercise where the most significant impacts are identified, and then the disclosures that have been negotiated as part of our multi-stakeholder process that illuminate those most significant impacts are used from the standards. I think it is in that balance that we need to evaluate the standards. There is, I think, a second layer discussion about the feasibility of reporting, and I would make 2 points about that. One is the feasibility on a principle level. Can organizations gather this information in a reasonable effort? And then there is a second layer of questions, are they currently in the position to do that? And these are fundamentally different observations for many of the subject matters. And I'm not certain that I would single out this particular one. I think it really depends on industry. Some industries are well advanced on this, others are not. But generally speaking, for many subject matters, we are putting forward disclosures that are leading in a way. and they're actually exploring aspects of impact, aspects of performance that many organizations have not ventured into in terms of their daily and therefore being able readily to have this information available on this level of detail. Last point about this is that when we go for public consultation, we can, of course, test these different layers. First of all, whether the set of information is complete, vis-a-vis the question, does that enable decision-making? But then also the feasibility on these two levels. Is it in principle possible? Is it possible at this point in time to get a better picture of how realistic the reporting expectation is?
Thank you, Bastian. I do have some points here. We do have principles-based standards. They are principles-based. We're asking companies to identify their most significant impacts. That does not preclude them from being mandatory, but what we are not doing is specifying particular disclosures for companies to make. They have to go through a process of identifying their most significant impacts. So just stressing that that does not preclude the standards being mandatory. There are other standards in the world that are mandatory and also principles based. On the question of being leading, you know, a couple of points in terms of what do we mean by leading? Leading in terms of having things in there that companies are not yet disclosing. Yes, we can push them. Reporting shouldn't be easy, but we have to balance that against the possibility that companies pick up a standard, see perhaps one thing that they could disclose at this point of time, and 3 or 4 or more other things that they're not able to disclose at this point of time, and whether that is discouraging them from disclosing at all. So I think that is a balancing act. I would suggest that we need to actually explore that. Maybe we have explored that already. I'm happy to hear a response from the staff on that. But if we haven't, then I think we should explore whether that is an issue for reporting organizations, whether that is a barrier. Shalendra, is this on the same point? Yeah, okay.
Carol, just to add to that, I was going to ask Bastian as well, because from a very practical point of view, from coming from the mediating institutions, we see third-party auditors. They take the materiality as a given. So once you have a materiality identified, the entire disclosure is required. So this becomes then a problem for companies that report on it, because it will say, just for example, if you take, say, health and safety, for example, if it's a material topic, then 403-1 to 403-9, you have to pick up the relevant disclosures. But once you pick up a disclosure, every single item in the disclosure needs to be reported on. If not, you get feedback saying, like, this, say, 403-1, A part 4 is not responded to. Now, that kind of conflicts with what you said in your point 1, Bastian. And is there some kind of guidance that we can give to reporters and to third-party assurance providers, saying that, look, it's the principles that are required here? Otherwise, like what Carol mentioned, it might just discourage people from reporting.
Thank you very much, Anne Lindsay. I suppose from my perspective, I just would, be taking a bit of a step back. And when we're reviewing the exercise of the Labour Standards Project, standards that were finalised in 2016. And so I think balance is crucial, but we also need to agree standards now, which will still remain credible looking ahead. If you think these ones, we're looking back over 10 years that have been extremely eventful, especially in relation to the issues we're talking about around business relationships. I think it's really interesting to hear the discussion. I think back to some of my past experience when I was one of the NGO board members at the Ethical Trading Initiative. Some of the things that we're talking about here aren't seen as that cutting edge for some companies. There are other companies that it would. We also have to bear that in mind. And, you know, personally, I think that the exposure drafts that are going out for consultation are in a very good place where it comes to that balance.
Okay, so it's just regarding the suggestion, the question that will be included in the PCP regarding gathering feedback on the concerns on the volume of information that is being asked. I wonder whether that question would also address whether the perception of the burden of reporting is influenced also by the uptake of mandatory reporting, because for some businesses, it might be if the mandatory reporting doesn't require as much detail and our standards are requiring this much details, then there might be a little bit of a confusion of there's so many details that I'm to disclose, and how do I determine that these are really the most significant impacts, and it's just too much to do. So how that question is phrased would be interesting to see what insights we can learn from it.
Yeah, so Bastian, a bit of a discussion there, but I think it comes back to what will we ask in the PCP questionnaire? And I am still interested to hear whether we have already explored this question of, in standards generally, does the level of information act as a barrier to disclosing at all?
I think where we have explored that is on individual topics and sectors in the last years with the public consultations, where there was feedback, sometimes on granularity, that was deemed not feasible and as a barrier to adoption of individual standards. On the aggregate level, I'm not sure that we've looked into this holistically as a research project, for example. But there is, of course, evidence that you have from the GI content indexes of companies where you can see, to Trilendra's point, and that would be my response to Trilendra, under the GI system, it is possible to have omissions, that's one, but also to point out that certain things are not actually capturing a significant impact. And that is with the more leading reporters, those that have been reporting for years and have been using the GI content index proactively, they're using this very clearly, right? That is also where GI works with companies to help them populate these content indexes in line with the in accordance criteria, and there we see that they're using this tool. At the time that the system was devised, I mean, that's maybe also important, this was anticipated that there would be also a dynamic around with reference that companies shy away from full adoption for different reasons, including sometimes the level of detail of the standards, and are selective in using the standards. What the board settled for at the time was to say we have to create something that there's still transparency around this, which disclosures have been used. And if there is an ambition communicated that you are actually in compliance, in accordance with the standards, then you have to force transparency on all the decisions involved on the detail of it. I think this is where the last time we had a much more holistic discussion on this, where the board landed. So in short, I think a lot of feedback from stakeholders on individual standards and sectors, but no holistic research on that dynamic as the full GI standards are applied.
Yes, Charles here. Just some high-level observation and comments about the potential selectivity omissions. I think, as you mentioned, I mean, if it's a GRI system, which it's true, but I wouldn't call it comply or explain, but I think it would be good still to, if you don't disclose on certain specific items of the general disclosure, you explain why, rather than just staying silent. So maybe there's something. And I say that in the context of, especially these topics, standard labor, social standard, which is one most overlooked, right? So really, and once it was a 16, you say it's a long overdue, even more close attention to make sure the standard is done correctly. I think that's why you had a lot of, that's my sense, you get a lot of comments and concerns, because environment, climate, it's ongoing, it's always moving, and labor has been really behind. And so I think we have to emphasize the fact that, okay, if you're not going to have anything to report on this, you still have to say we don't, and kind of why. I think it's better to be more than less. That's my take.
Yeah, so under the current system, there is a very clear request to actually use one of the reasons for emissions and explain. But also in instances where data is not available, because this particular standard could be one of those areas. In certain sectors, there's general agreement among stakeholders that this is an important subject, but that the information is oftentimes not available to this level of detail. I would compare it to the Scope 3 discussions that we had on a climate for many years. So there is the ambition, oftentimes even led by sector organizations, to induce more transparency on these things, but it will go slower than some of the external stakeholders certainly would hope for. So in the GI standards, it's very clear that you also have to communicate by when you close these individual data gaps. And these data gaps can exist both for full disclosure, but more often they actually exist for sub-elements of the disclosure. And so our system already sets this out, provided that the organization has the ambition to report in accordance with the standards, right? That is still the guiding principle. With reference, it's slightly different. There you're looking more at the reality of just inducing transparency of what the company has chosen to employ from the GI standards.
Thank you all. I think it's important to keep having that discussion and keep coming back to it and making sure that we are all happy with the way that we're going, because we keep being asked about this. This is something that we are continually challenged on, and not to single out this particular standard, but maybe on all our standard questionnaires, we should have a question which tries to explore this, perhaps by asking respondents whether they think companies would be put off by reporting one of the possible types of responses on the content index around non-disclosure, why there is non-disclosure. By asking the question, we're also raising awareness of those options for non-disclosure. So that perhaps that's something that could be considered for all future exposure draft questions.
Sebastian, again, maybe we can take as an action that based on the discussion, and maybe these points will come up more in the coming days, that we draft a generic set of questions in relation to this subject, right? And we bring that back before we commence the public consultation now on this set of standards. This could be a fairly quick turnaround on this, and that might then render some information that can form an input to future research on this and discussion.
I like that proposal. Are there any other comments on that proposal? Susanna?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to make one comment, maybe specifically also on the drafting of public consultation questions. It would be good if the drafting is made with the principle in mind that the burden, of reporting should be accounted for with respect to standards compatibility. So I think that having in mind what the global authoritative standards say about the scope and depth of the need to monitor business relationships conduct, we have like a framework there, and this maybe with you know, like the observation in mind that the fact that information is maybe at that point not available or it's burdensome to report does not stop the negative impacts. So the things are ongoing, and actually, like the of proper monitoring would rather increase the negative impacts than, you know, decrease. So there is a really need to have that in mind, and also like there is maybe I'm thinking about drafting the questions and overall you know, like logics for it. We also perhaps need to differentiate within the reporters. So the level of detail would be, you know, should be larger with the reporters with big capacity and with big influence on the business relationships. So this burden should not be like a catch-all argument against quality of reporting.
To disagree with this. If you have 19,000 suppliers and over 1 million customers, FMCG sector, it's very difficult to put to them, okay, for own operations, it's fine, it's very clear. But for upstream, downstream in the value chain, it's very difficult for complex operations to put it, because you cannot say to small cafeteria that you are selling your products, you need to have human rights guideline. If you don't, we will not do business with you. It's a social aspect there as well. So it should be a balanced approach, what Carol said.
Well, I kind of agree with what Susanna said, and I think your point can come out in the PCP questionnaire that Bastian's talked about, designing some questions that would come back to us, because of course these significant impacts, they're not only the impacts, they lead to risks for the organization, which is another reason, another incentive for the organization to be managing and monitoring them. So I think, Galia, your point, we need to design these questions in a way that brings out, you know, what kind of responses are acceptable for companies to give. Would they be put off disclosing at all if they had to disclose the kind of reason that you've said? You know, would the fact that they're having to think about the reason encourage them in the future to maybe think about ways that they could disclose more? Okay, is everybody happy with that? Yeah, okay. Trying to find a middle line here. Okay, so I think we've come to a good point there of having a think about the questions and then coming back to us. Thank you, Bastian, for that. And I'll hand back now to the team.
To the next slide, okay. Sorry, yeah. Sorry, Hannah. So, probably go back to Carol. So I get back to Carol, because that was what I.
Well, this is the first document, so basically we have the approval of this one.
Or I don't know how you prefer, if I present this one, already present labor rights and go and continue to freedom of association, or one by one as you prefer, Carol.
Can we approve this? Can we take this vote now?
Yeah.
Everybody happy to do that? Okay.
Including the action.
Does the GSSB approve this exposure draft for public? Thank you. Does the GSSB approve this exposure draft for public consultation, subject to us having a look at some updated consultation questions to go out with it?
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to the next one.
Perfect. So now we are going to go through the comments received for the Freedom of Association standard draft. By the time we submit the slides to the GSSB, we received 14 comments. Mostly of the comments were content-related comments, 13, and only one implemented prior the public consultation, and we replied to some of those that we consider along the PCP feedback. I can start with the comments received on suggesting that the FACT B1C that is related to the company report, the action taken, I don't think I will say that better you, honestly. The actions the organizations take to prevent, mitigate, and remediate impacts on anti-union discrimination, retaliation, and intimidation. The comment from the GSSB member was to have a more balanced disclosure that also reflects the impacts or the potential negative impact the union activity may have on other stakeholders or on the public interest. What we can bring from the TC discussion of this is that the intention of this particular requirement was to give the organization the possibility and also to demonstrate how they respect this fundamental right to form and to join trade unions and also engage in collective bargaining. At the same time, they will meet like due diligence expectations. So that we recommend as part of this is kind of the intent of the requirement. So as a team, we recommend that these suggestions is kind of out of the scope of the labor standards, so that it will be like the suggestion is not recommending a new disclosure because it will be like out of the scope of this standard. I don't know if there are comments or I can continue. Okay, questions? No? So the second group of comments also, back. The second group of comments were related to concerns related again with the granularity of some of the disclosure for this draft regarding the coverage of the employees by collective bargaining agreements. These requirements encompass disaggregation by gender, employee category, employee type. What we have from the discussion, or what I can bring in from the discussion with the TC, is that they consider or they discuss that only, for instance, having just a high level like metric of coverage will be not sufficient to reveal, for instance, like systemic patterns of discrimination or inequalities of. I remember that, for instance, if the proposal to have, for instance, employee type, so it showed like the difference between permanent employees and temporary employees, gender. It also brings points about potential discrimination, potential gender discrimination, inequalities. So they think that is a good metric to expose in the terms of gender, for instance, gender pay gaps. So on another point of that is that GRI already requests in the universal standards 2.7 and 2.8 information by employee category, employee type, and gender. So the additional information for this particular disclosure will be the coverage by collective bargaining agreement, which they think, at least from the perspective from the businesses in our TCNG, is already an information that human resources department need to collect for the payroll function. So that is like, I don't know, comments on questions?
Natalia, apologies for not asking this question earlier, but you mentioned that the standards team believes that it's beyond the scope of the labor standards, the negative impacts caused by trade unions. My question there is, okay, in that case, where would you report it? Because look, as much as we expect to report the negatives impacts by our value chain partners, suppliers in the value chain, where would we then report the negative impacts caused by our own trade unions? Where would that come in then? The point of balance arises from that point that we are not allowing our reporters from particular value chains. So where would it lie?
Yeah, maybe I would like that with the unions. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I suppose I see that the purpose of this standard is to focus on the organisation's performance and its impact and its policies in terms of how it's protecting this as one of the core fundamental labour rights. And I think if we've talked about social impacts being the Cinderella impacts within sustainability, I would argue that freedom of association and collective bargaining are the Cinderellas within social impacts. We know this has been part of the fundamental ILO rights for decades, and yet there are still quite a lot of challenges in place. So in response to your question, I suppose from a union perspective, I would argue that we have seen in instances where there are these kind of disputes. Obviously, we're hoping the use of the standard would prevent getting to that kind of situation. That companies are often extremely forthcoming in their public disclosures, press releases on what they see in response to your question. So I don't think it's a problem for companies at the moment in putting that kind of information out. Whereas I think this side of the equation is often missing. So that's where I very much agree with the analysis around the scope. And, we're certainly aware of a number of companies that would be disclosing this information in great detail about what they see on what is admittedly quite a subjective judgment.
Does the staff want to make any comments? No? Okay, thank you. Continue.
Yeah. So moving on to the next slide, we receive a group of comments on the feasibility of the disclosure 5 in this draft standard. That is this disclosure, and I also combine it with the comments related to the reporting incidents on business relationship regarding violations on freedom of association and collective bargaining. So for this, the TC decide to have a disclosure for show like the proactive engagement and the proactive leverage organization have with their business relationship. So that's why they consider what's necessary to have a requirement that show what are they doing, how they are, for instance, providing training or providing support, how to improve the right of freedom of association and collective bargaining with the business relationship. They also consider that for the point of the incidents reporting for business relationship, that this is a essential component in human rights due diligence. The TC and the AG acknowledge that it's might be also a difficult reporting information, but without that information, for organization, it's also complex to address the impacts and also influence their business relationship on this fundamental right and work. Another argument they discuss largely on this topic is that freedom of association and collective bargaining is also a foundation and enabled right. So this right that enables the protection of other rights. So that's why it's very vital in business relationship. So that's were the two critical arguments. Another comment that we receive is for the last point of reporting incidents in business relationship is the confidentiality of the information. So we received comments on this for reporting incidents. What I can bring to the table is that the TC discuss and conclude that yes, generally like is not confidential. However, it could be like confidential for some business relations, for some jurisdiction. So organizations like can report that if they have like difficulties for getting this information because their business relationship express like concerns to disclose. Another interesting like point that I can bring is that the AG, the advisory group, like provides some example of some companies already like doing like some evidence. So they report there are some companies already doing it. Examples of how the first tier or the second tier suppliers are like with collective bargaining agreements in place. So those are like the overall like points that I can bring like as part of the TC and AG discussion on these two disclosures. Thank you. I don't know, any comment or question?
Any questions, comments? No. Move on. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay, so
have
now
the
we're being
content.
asked whether we approve this exposure draft for release, subject again to us having some questions to look at, which we'll then use on all our future exposure drafts regarding the reporting burden and so on. Are we all happy to approve this exposure draft? Yes, again, that is unanimous. Thank you. Now we have a few minutes before lunch, and I think rather than start talking about another standard, I want to just see if you have any sense of the level of feedback you've had on the consultation so far on the labour standards, and any non-formal, informal feedback you can give us on where that has gone.
And you had that no more
We have
than
to do
me.
without overhead. Huh?
Yeah.
I think so. We just to read Harold Powers from the staff. So we are now in our final discussion of the final PCPs for the labour one. So we had 3 sessions already before this, as you know. We all concluded them. I can say the last one, which is just concluded on non-discrimination and DIVE. We didn't research that thoroughly enough from the first phase. So the employment one, we had quite some more fundamental, well, that's fundamental things we want to discuss with the TC. It's too early to exactly say what, but also on the remuneration, you can imagine the discussions about in living wage around that kind of somehow quite some feedback was very positive, but we are very clear, but we still need to discuss some things because it's a hot item on that. So that's for the significant changes document, very little, basically nothing. So maybe we can even keep it as it is. Again, we have to discuss this, so it can, we bring it back to OTC. OTC will meet in person in end of January. We will go, we go through all the more fundamental or things we think we need to discuss. So that's again a first flavor. The amount of feedback was quite good. We had sessions throughout the world, so the amount of feedback was positive. Not the hundreds of comments like for climate or others, but certainly between 50 and 100 for each of the documents. So that's quite good for labour standards. Chair.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about that, whether that is at a level that we would want it to be, and what could be done about it. I mean, we've finished that PCP now, but yeah, I'd be interested in views on that, Anne.
Thanks, Carol. I think, I suppose, coming at this from sort of like a global union constituency where you're having to respond to multiple consultations, not just GRI ones. So obviously they're extremely important. I think there's been a huge crunch period in spring and summer this year where I would imagine that many people would be tasked with responding to a range of consultations, including these ones. So I think maybe that's where we need to think creatively to make sure that we do get high numbers of responses. But I think this 2025 has been overload in terms of quite in-depth technical consultation responses. So I wonder if that has been a factor.
Yeah, but what about reporters? You know, you're talking organisation, but you know, we're clearly not getting many responses from reporters in that case.
Be aware that if I, Harold Powell's staff GRI, when I talk about reviews, it's a fully filled in questionnaire. So that's the number of, we not take into account the feedback we get in webinars, etc. So the number of people we reach is a multiplier of that. We actually are discussing how can we bring the barrier, especially we hear from regions there is a language barrier. So how can we help in Japan, in China, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa? How can we help with lowering the barrier of submitting in English? So could we maybe translate? Could we do something on a workshop level with our regional offices to gather it within the due process protocol? Of course, that has to be. So we certainly, it's not about the interest, it's really about how to get really the feedback. But to give a comparison, on the UK regulatory, which was mentioned earlier, I think there were 500 submissions. It's the entire system, including climate. But for sure, we want to have credible, good feedback, of course, and that's so we get a lot of feedback, but it's often like in workshops and just just some lines. But you want to have also the full questionnaire being filled in. That's what we try to do.
Okay, so on top of the 50 to 100 questionnaire feedbacks, there are lots of focus groups and things going on. So another question then, you mentioned the language thing. There are now some pretty good apps in terms of translation. Could we translate the questionnaire using an app? I mean, there will be a lot of standard questions that we're putting in, a lot of different PCP questionnaires, and use a translator to also translate the responses that we get. Is that something that we could consider?
Powell's staff, so I can first answer and then maybe Bastian, but actually we are with LATAM also piloting, so just also an AI translator, and again, we have to double check. I call it a pilot because we have to make sure it's within the due process protocol approvals, that we know it's coming from the source, etc. If you summarize, for instance, 5 people giving a reply and then they say, can we summarize this as one comment? That becomes difficult because then we do not know who said what. You have to be transparent and credible about it. But for sure, yeah, I think there are a lot of solutions in working with the tools we have nowadays. So we are certainly, we want to pilot also for the next one on LATAM. On these, we have already a system which we can use and trial also for that. So bring this burden of language, at least throw it away. Actually, these kind of tools have all languages in there. That's quite amazing.
Charles and then Bastian.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the Charles, so yes, response, and it goes back to the question of having been, again, I kind of repeat that, underlooked, and on one hand, it could be quite a burden, could appear new, but some companies, this is a burdensome, but on the other hand, I think it's a good sign to see some interest despite that. Depending on you say, for A-level standards, not bad, because you expect lower, and then you got, but I that clearly has been underreported, except for things like when it sees that regulation, monastery act happens in the UK, in California, in different jurisdictions. There, because of the mandate it has, but this kind of disclosure has not really come across a lot the last few years. So I think we have to find a balance between the expectation, the effect of being kind of, oh, this is a new standard. No, it's not new, it's just updated. I just comment on the language. If we go, I was surprised that if we go for language issue, I think that it has to go for all. English is important. I know that there have been some volunteers. There's a colleague that I'm in Arabic. I don't exactly been in touch, but maybe there's some volunteers or there's some people who are willing to help in that. And I understand AI is convenient, but translation sometimes you need you need the nuances, because honestly, some of these languages, I tried some of these, even French English, doesn't work. So yeah, you cannot rely on AI basically. Right?
Okay, yeah, and just to clarify, that wasn't a suggestion in terms of just these standards. Some of the responses we've had in the past have also not been as high as we might really like them to be. And if we're only reaching English language, people who can respond in the English language, that's quite limiting. Bastian, do you have a brilliant solution for this?
No, I can only say, I mean, GI has a lot of translation experience. We're translating the standards to 10 languages. And I would echo what Charles just said, that when you actually translate these standards, there is a lot of detail that needs to be attended to. We have committees of experts going over each standard that is already done by professional agencies in almost all instances. And that leads to months of discussions for individual standards, right? Oftentimes in terms of terminology. That has also to do that we're settling many of these discussions for the first time. But generally speaking, there's a lot. So the one thing I would say, I think expanding that out in terms of using technology to translate will stretch the timelines further. We would have to allow more time for these consultations, because a quick translation, AI-enabled, of these standards just for public consultation might have unintended consequence. So we need to have some quality assurance over it, not in the same way as we have for a final document, for sure not, but there are these nuances. And I think the other point that Harold was making is also very important, with all the capabilities that emerge around summarizing, whether that's from different languages or just technical feedback that we're receiving. What we are seeing, and I think there's some live experiments now in the regulatory space, there's still the human element needed, and you actually need to go over the responses. So by all means, like, support it, getting more feedback from a good cross-section of the stakeholders in the different regions. Yes, we will look at and we're experimenting as Harold has explained. But there is something also around the timeline, and that's always a give and take. Extending that out is going to stretch the timelines.
Okay, so I wasn't actually thinking about translating the exposure drafts.
Yeah, but you would have to do that for people to access, because the real issue is the accessibility of the content.
Okay, so my thinking was that there will be people who can read English quite well, but are not comfortable in writing in English and writing responses in English. Can we invite people to respond in a different language and then translate it using AI? Is that going to be worth it?
No.
Should we try it?
Yeah, I think this is we're experimenting in that space. We're presenting these standards in another language in a very detailed way and inviting response in that language. That's where we are right now. But for what you're describing, our experience, because we've done this in the past, is if you don't translate the source documents, then these will go through a quick AI translation, and people react to an AI translated document, and you cannot square that. In the past, we had local partners translating quickly documents, and we had some repercussions from that. So it's yeah, I think that there is something in that space, and it needs, the source documents need to be ideally translated as well.
Terrell.
Yeah, and like Charles said, it's also, when kind of drafting English, and also, please take into account that kind of translating into the other languages, and not to have kind of, too much nuanced languaging and no double meaning and so on and so forth. The latest example is this monetary flow, and which really I struggled to translate. What's the difference from cash flow, money flow, and other things? And monetary flow doesn't necessarily mean the
same
flow.
thing.
It's more like a distribution money. So this type of language is really difficult to, we have a difficulty even though you use a professional translator.
And we had that discussion in Japan about translating just transition as well, that that was challenging. Okay, thank you very much. We'll finish for lunch now and go offline. We have a private session starting at 1 p.m. and we'll be back online at 1:30 p.m. in an hour and a half or shortly afterwards.
Recording stop.